So I am really honored to introduce Trudy Bateman, who has kindly agreed to come and talk to us about the Cappfinity Strengths Profile assessments. Trudy, welcome.
Brilliant, thank you.
Welcome, Trudy.
Super, let me just share my screen then and away we go. Super, so thank you very much for having me here this evening, and Anne and I are jointly going to do this session, although I think Anne's spotlight's taken over slightly because my session needs to be wrapped up in just a few minutes as I'm going to do the introduction there. So but thank you all for your brilliant stories, because as I was listening to this evening, I'm thinking, well, actually, you've done my job for me, really. You've all spoken about strength so passionately. You've all come sharing your stories and all the things that have made a difference to you. So really my job here today is just to walk through a couple of the more formal bits about how we define strengths. But so, you know, thank you to Anne and James and Giovanni for all your brilliant stories already. So where do we begin then? So I guess the first thing is just to set the scene. My role as Director of Strengths Profile. Some of you have already had the chance now to take Strengths Profile. Don't worry if you haven't already. You can do so following the session. So that link will be available to all mentors and mentees. So just follow along anyway. We want to make it practical, and that's where Anne's going to come in with her expertise of careers and application. So what is a strength then? I guess we've talked about it quite a lot this evening and you've all shared some brilliant stories, but how do we define a strength? And some of this you've already used already. So a strength needs to be something you are good at. I mean, Anne's talked about maybe it's come through a different journey, maybe a struggle, but it's still something that right now you're good at. So that makes sense. Yeah, we wouldn't expect anything different. And for those of you that may be thinking about, you know, recruitment in any way, shape or form, whether it's as a graduate or as a mentor, you know, we typically think about performance, good performance as competency, a level you can do. But then you get to energy, and energy is all about the motivation and the passion, the why you get out of bed in the morning, your stories and what makes them your story. So the energy is really, really important. It's the bit that's going to make all the, you know, it's the bit that's going to take you from what we call sort of average to A+. It's going to really help define those choices that you're making and help you make much more conscious choices as you go through your career as well. So I'm sure most of us who are my age, and you know, I know Anne and Ellen have gone through their stories, but most of us wouldn't be here, I'm sure, without our stories. But maybe if we could have avoided one or two of them on the way, we might have done. So it's all about giving you a conscious choice now about where you take your career, whatever stage you're at. And then it's about use. It's about how often you're doing it, how often you're demonstrating it as well. One of the stories that I briefly wanted to share is that when you talked when Anne talked about sort of your family, I guess, your values in the family, or how your rules, I guess, in the family. One thing that made me smile, because one of my top strengths is legacy, so I'm all about future and making a difference. But alongside that is my counterpoint. And rightly or wrongly in my family, maybe a generation piece, you know, parenting wasn't collaborated. It wasn't a collaboration sort of joint decision how you might do something or whether you could participate in those rules. The rules were yours as children to follow, and that was that, however ridiculous they were. And for years, I always fought those rules. I was always saying, but why? They're ridiculous rules, Mum, Dad, you know. And then counterpoint ended up being one of my top strengths, in which I hold very dear now. So I'm always about thinking, you know, how do I bring a different viewpoint to others? So I think, you know, just again, that story of where you've come from, embrace it, define it, and learn from it, and help to make those more of your strengths as you go forward. So we've talked about obviously performance, energy and use, and then that fits into this model. So I know some of you have your profiles and some of you don't. Absolutely fine. What the questions in the strengths profile will do is define this model for you. So you have 4 quadrants. Of the 60 strengths that we measure, you'll get your realized strengths. So these are the things that you perform well in, you're energized, and you're using a lot. Now, because of that, we want you to use them wisely, which means dialing them up and down. And that's when we come back to this sort of conscious career. How is that going to help me? How's personal responsibility going to help me? How's enabler going to help me? Anne's going to take you through this a lot more practically in the session as well. So really important that we use our strengths wisely, our realised strengths, because we love it, we're doing it a lot, and we're really good at it. And what we don't want to do is get burned out by those over time. Which takes me nicely into our learned behaviours then. So these are the things that we perform well at, but we don't find that energizing. Now, for me, in my 12 years I've been doing this is the light bulb moment for so many people, particularly when it comes to careers. It's so important that you get this quadrant and that you have that light bulb moment for yourself. So what am I saying here? Stuff you're good at, the stuff you don't enjoy. And most of us in our careers at some point, my son is 19, he's just in his first year of uni, really transformational already. The stuff he's good at, but not the stuff he enjoys. So we often just need to work that through, what that means for us in our careers as well. So most of my job, when I'm coaching, will be to help people coach themselves out of their learned behaviours and into their realised strengths. But you've got an opportunity to really help shape those realised strengths rather than your learned behaviours, which if you haven't taken the tool, you'll find out. Then we look at weaknesses. We don't define weaknesses, and I work in the corporate world day in, day out. We still don't define weaknesses there either. It's very much around we use our strengths to compensate, and we use these less. So no one's beating themselves up here. If you've got weaknesses, we've all got them, and it's time to think about using your strengths instead. Now, one of the most exciting quadrants is the unrealised strengths. So this is an area of potential, of potential passion, potential performance. So think about this as an area to develop things you're good at and you're energised in, but you're not getting an opportunity to use. So this is an area that I'm sure Anne will be bringing out and thinking about how you can be doing more of the things in your unrealised strengths. So then just a couple more bits for me really before I hand on to the lovely Anne, and that's the benefits of strengths for yourselves as individuals. So of course, this programme is very much about you as a leader and how to make those right choices and being a great leader and how to make those career choices, but it's also about you as an individual and what you'll get from bringing strengths to that leadership as well. So the science will tell us that we're happier, much more confident when we're using our strengths. It helps us to reduce stress and increase resilience. We've heard quite a bit on the call today, haven't we, about resilience. It's a bit of a theme. We've got to where we have done already because of sheer determination, persistence and resilience coming through. But by using things that you're good at and you love to do, naturally will be more resilient. We heard about the well-being story, in that actually if you choose a career that you're good at, the sacrifices end up being the right sacrifices. You enjoy what you do, you bring in confidence, motivation. You're much more likely to achieve your goals when you use your strengths because they're things that you enjoy and you're good at. You develop much quicker in the areas of your strengths as well. We've all had friends and colleagues where we've gone, how did you get that? Where did they go? I'm still here on the manual on page 2 on YouTube. And somebody just gets something straight away, often a sign of their strengths as well. And then finally, we're much more confident in our career decisions because we have that ability to be able to match our strengths with careers and think about how that will pan out as well. So they're the benefits, and finally here, just thinking about actually what that means beyond yourself. So in your team. So bearing in mind, I work again in that corporate world day in, day out, is that these, I'm also employed as a consultant to support teams to use their strengths and for these types of areas, to teams to communicate much better, to delegate, to be creative, to build trust, to build diversity. Some great ways in which that if you go into an organisation, so about 48% now, or nearly 50% are now recruiting on the basis of some form of strengths in organisations, it's likely that you'll hit strengths even in those organisations that don't recruit, will be in there somewhere in terms of development as well. And how they might use strengths then to make you help you be your best every day. So all sorts of organisational benefits here in terms of retention, engagement and flow. Onboarding, all the sorts of success that you would expect. But organisations are very wise to the fact that they want you to come to work every day being motivated and being your best self. So on that note then, Anne, the floor is all yours, my dear, and I will let you take them into the practical strengths session, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Thanks very much, Trudy, and I will just start to share mine again with a couple of slides. I was smiling actually as Trudy was talking, because we both share a love of Spotlight, which is that we actually secretly really like an audience, and I could just imagine her and I over a karaoke microphone fighting for control over the microphone, both desperate to be centre of attention. So there you have it. That's a strength that we share straight up. So thanks very much for sharing that. And it's been really interesting hearing from a number of people who are here tonight, examples either of your own personal strengths or recognition of different aspects of strengths and things that motivate people in the workplace. So that's been really good to kind of add some flesh onto the bones, really, of this topic. What I'd like to do next is to move us on to have a practical activity. And once again, we have the wonderful James and Day who volunteered to take part in a brief exercise. Now, normally in the real world, we'd be doing this in a room, and we'd be having two people who came to the front of the room. You'd all be watching. So I'm not quite sure how this is going to work, but I'm going to ask each of them in a moment to try and illustrate strengths in action by taking it in turns to spend 1 minute each talking about something they really love to do. And I'll time it, and I'll stop you each when the time runs out, and then we're going to flip this around and get each of you to spend a minute talking about something you really, really dislike. And the audience's role is to spend the 4 minutes noticing, listening, and observing what you see and what you hear from those two participants when they're talking about the things they love and the things that they dislike. So, James, would you like to go first? And are you happy, whenever you're ready? I've got the stopwatch at the ready to talk about something that you really, really enjoy.
Yeah, so thank you, Anne. So I guess to begin with, so something I'm really passionate about is football. I think it's great because you've got so much teamwork, there's camaraderie. You've not only got the aspect of playing football, but watching football is great. It's really entertaining. You've got the highs and lows of the game. You've also got the travelling aspect of football with away games, so you can go to different cities all over the country, experience different cultures, meet new people. You've also got the fact that it keeps you really fit and healthy, and being able to do that within a team, either with your friends. I think that's it's a really important way to keep fit, and it's really interesting when you really do when you're really invested into it. It's so good for you, and you need something that you just love doing. So yeah.
Fabulous, pretty much bang on the minute. That's lovely. Okay, Day, would you like to come forward and spend a minute telling us about something you particularly like as well?
Yes, and thank you for the time. So I'll be talking about my cooking hobbies. So I was hired as a chef back in 2019, November so at that time I started cooking, and I just absolutely loved the aspect of serving people good food, no matter who they are, just passing by or working offices, regular customers, being able to serve them delicious Chinese food day in, day out, really gave me joy. And from that job, I kind of brought that home and started cooking all sorts of cuisines in my own house. So I've got a cabinet full of all different spices, all from around the world. Japanese, cooking a little bit Turkish, Chinese being my favorite, and of course Indian from my heritage. And overall, these skills have helped me to, just bring this hobby and develop it as much as I can. And serving my friends and family great food now that I'm not able to work as I'm going
to stop you now. I'm loving hearing your story, but the time's up, but you've illustrated that really well. So thank you very much for that, Day. Now we're going to swap things around, and I'm going to ask James to talk for a minute about something you really dislike doing. So your time starts now.
So something I'd say that I really dislike doing, or what really annoys me, is doing chores. Mm-hmm. So typically they're very boring. They can be quite unpleasant. And I think I can speak for a lot of people here, is that they're especially unpleasant when you're having to do them in student accommodation. They make me stressed if I don't get them done. There always seems to be an endless amount of chores, and they take up so much time and energy. And so they're quite demotivating, actually. And what I'd rather be doing is, again, out with friends or doing something that's interesting or much more productive in my eyes. So yeah, chores for me, they're not the most fulfilling of tasks.
Thank you very much. You didn't even manage to stretch it out for a whole minute, which is interesting in itself. So thank you very much. Day, it's your turn to vent now on something you dislike doing.
So recently, as I'm asthmatic, I got the second shot of the vaccine. And although the process was quite streamlined, I don't quite enjoy going to medical establishments. Being at a hospital or going to the dentist isn't the most pleasant journey one takes. The waiting in the waiting room, the A&E, is not fun, especially when you have a broken arm, and it's really painful. But going to the hospital and being around doctors and nurses, syringes, taking medicine is also quite a difficult task for myself. Don't enjoy the smell. But yeah.
Thank you very much. Interestingly, again, we didn't quite stretch it to the full minute, which I think is quite telling. So I'm curious to know from the audience, as a result of James and Day doing a valiant job there of talking about the things they loved and disliked, what did you observe when they were either talking about the things that they liked or disliked?
My difficulty is that I know Day and James very well, so I might be influenced by my prior knowledge of them. But if I try and not be biased, knowing what I know, James is quite creative in his mind, quite collaborative and team oriented. He might not quite as much enjoy process-driven roles, which is a good job that you're going to Kantar. And maybe the chores, it's interesting, James's point about chores. I love chores because they create order and structure and enable me to implement my processes efficiently. So it's amazing how different people are.
Control.
Yes, thank you for saying that.
I can agree to that. The only chore I really enjoy doing is dishes, which is quite surprising, but
well, it enables your cooking. It enables your cooking.
Yeah, that's true. But it's kind of a good way to just do a boring task, but clear your mind in a way. But yeah, I think I enjoy some chores more than others. But yeah, I agree to that.
Good to know. Thank you.
Anybody else want to come in on what they noticed in terms of either tone or the way the individual approached the topic? Yeah, we've got some things in the chat here. So yes, it is much easier to talk about the things that we love. We could, I had to stop Day talking about the cooking and the passion for that, because you could have talked for probably quite a long time, couldn't you? Because you were so enthusiastic about it. Yes, and Alan says, James smiled a lot more when he's talking about the things he didn't like, was very serious about the things he did like, but I thought he was in the zone. The authenticity for me came through with, in both instances. But yes, it's interesting. Maybe James felt a bit sheepish that he didn't like the chores. James, did you? I don't know.
I thought it was the part of it. I thought was that the thing you hate, you don't need to go and make anyone else believe. The thing you love, you want to convince them. You have to keep out enough things that one of them will land someone.
Yes. In an ideal world, I'm thinking in terms of the interview context, for example, if you're applying for a job that you're genuinely interested and enthusiastic about, then this should flow through and carry through in the conversation as the interview progresses, because enthusiasm is quite difficult to fake over a period of time. Your non-verbal expressions will probably give you away. You'll be smiling just that little bit too hard trying to do a convincing job, perhaps. So yeah, I think the energy was coming through and the passion, I think, when both of them were talking about the things that they like. So it was just a fun exercise to get you showing strengths when they come to life, really, and to think about, as Ellen pointed out, what particular strengths are going on there in relation to demonstrating the things that the different speakers were sharing.
And I think, Anne, if I may interject, I think something that is really powerful is not only recognizing your own natural style and strengths, but as you do that, beginning to notice other people's. Because some of the most happy and successful people, as well as some of the easiest people to work with, are those who flex their style to the people around them. So for example, in my case, knowing how structured and process driven I am, I do try and pick up on the clues about the team that I work with. And if they are not quite as process driven as I am, I try and mellow that down a bit and be a little bit more flexible to the way they might want to come to solutions, to the way they would like to work, so that they would be more comfortable working with me.
It's a really interesting point, and one of the takeaways I was hoping to leave people with at the end of this session is, some of you may have had a chance to have complete the profile and starting to think about it, and I'm very happy that we leave a bit of time at the end if you should have questions about your profiles, because between us, Trudy and I'm sure can help unpack those for you. But it is a really interesting exercise when you take the strength dictionary that you will get as part of the report, because on that dictionary there are 60 strengths from which the profiles that you end up with are drawn, and actually spending a bit of time strength spotting and watching other people and what they do particularly skillfully, and trying to start to recognize what particular strengths they are demonstrating will help, as Ellen says, you understand that, you know, we're all different and we have these different groups of strengths in the way that perhaps means we behave, or we prefer to approach tasks or deliver our work. So therefore understanding those people around you as well as understanding your own can really help with kind of harmonize with how other people tend to operate, even if they're quite different to you. I was going to go on to say, so we've done the listening for strengths. I was going to revisit the strengths quadrant, because this is what you will receive within your profile. You'll know this if you've completed it already, and come back to one or two of the points that Trudy was making about the strengths quadrant, and to illustrate some of these in actions and what the nuances and the differences are between some of them. So Trudy talked about the unrealized strengths, for example, being the exciting area of this is where all your dormant potential lies, an opportunity that if only you had the opportunity to make use of some of these strengths, it's really good to try and look consciously at what appears in your unrealized strengths profile and think about, okay, so if these are things I'm good at, what opportunities might I find to try and consciously use those unrealized strengths? So you're extending the range of strengths that you have from just your realized strengths into the unrealized strengths as well. So you have a whole range of different things that you will enjoy using. So it's flexing those unused muscles where you can. The learned behaviours is a really interesting one, because this is what I tend to nickname the duty quadrant. These are proficiencies. These are things that we are perfectly capable of doing. They are simply not things that thrill or energise us. We get the joy from the realised strengths and the unrealised strengths. So spending time in those quadrants doing those things and engaging with them is where you're going to have the most fun, make the most contribution, and time will pass really quickly. If you're using your strengths or your unrealised strengths to complete a task, the whole morning will go by and you won't even realise that you were hungry or thirsty, and suddenly lunchtime's upon you. You've just been so absorbed in what you've been doing. And that feeling of being in flow and in the moment and in the zone is a really interesting one to hang on to. In an ideal world, jobs that we go into will have a good chunk of time where we are able to flourish and use those strengths, both the realised and the unrealised, where we can. Learned behaviours are the things that every job will have an element of learned behaviours in it, because they just are. And if you have, like me, a to-do list, you will find that the learnt behaviours relate to the tasks that invariably drop to the end of a busy day. You haven't perhaps managed quite to get around to doing them because they're really dull. So they're the things you know you've got to do, but actually, you know, you would prefer to be doing other things. So it's not realistic to say that every job will have only realised and unrealised strengths opportunities within them. They'll all have an element of learnt behaviours, but hopefully not too many of them. And then the weaknesses, what I love about the strengths profile is this is all about positive psychology. And so the emphasis is much more on your strengths and what you can do. Weaknesses are the things that, frankly, as Trudy says, it's best not to invest time in other than to become basically proficient in order to cope with something that you have to get done. Because even if you become better at them, they're probably not likely to budge from learnt behaviours. So you can do them, and they might become can-dos, but they're probably never going to become love-to-dos. So it's an element of knowing what they are. And I was having a conversation with James last week, and we were talking about how we won't personalise this by sharing what James's profile had in it, but there are ways that he could harness, for example, some of his unrealised strengths as workarounds for some of those weaknesses. But what's really neat is that you could perhaps think about the weaknesses that you do have, and when you're asked in an interview to give an example of a weakness, lo and behold, you've got 2 or 3 examples of actual weaknesses. So maybe pick the one, because they're all real, and think about frankly describing what it is you're not so good at, but also think about what do you do as a workaround for that particular weakness. Are there strengths that you could use from your profile that you could tap into that say, I know, for example, in my case, detail is one of my weaknesses. If I have to sit through and read a report and make it accurate, you know, I will do. Invariably, there'll be the odd error in there, because it's just not exciting to me. I'm on to the next project, the next big thing, and the strategy and not the detail. That doesn't energize me. So I can go through a report, but other people are much better at spotting errors and silly mistakes than I am. So sometimes there's a case for working with people who have complementary strengths to you, so you can offset against one another. So when you're looking collectively as a team, some of you will have different things to bear, and somebody might be really skilled at spotting those annoying little errors that you tend to overlook and gloss over. A difference in terms of illustrating between a learnt behaviour and a realised strength is where your strength sits. So if I have planful and it's a realised strength, and somebody in the office says, Anne, would you organise the Christmas party again? My immediate thought is, be brilliant, a project. I'm going to love organising. This is going to be brilliant. Everybody's going to have a fantastic time. And I will organise the event. The coach will arrive on time. The drinks will flow freely. Everybody will have a marvellous time. The music will be really good. And everybody will remember it for a long time afterwards. And I will have had a lot of fun organising it. If, however, a learnt behaviour of mine is planful, then my first thought is one of resentment. Why is it always me that has to organise the Christmas party? But I will organise a perfectly great Christmas do in much the same way that the output looks the same. The coach will arrive on time, the booze will flow freely, everybody will have said what a great do it was. But I would not have felt the joy of organising it. And that's the difference. So it's where your strengths sit and where the energy, the accompanying energy comes from, that's important to look at. The other thing that I wanted to say is, when you find your realised strengths and you're really excited and jumping about thinking, oh my God, this is brilliant, you know, I've got this lovely array of strengths I can use, think of it a bit like piano keys. Don't bang them all loudly all at once. It's about melody and harmony. So there is a time and a place for using to the right amount, at the right level, the right strengths. If I use my rapport builder all the time, to engage in small talk with people at a party all night long, I will wear myself out and I will need a break from doing that, and so will everybody else around me probably. So open days are a great example of that. I love an open day, but by about 4 o'clock, I'm exhausted. I've made small talk all day. I've kind of overdone the rapport builder. So I need to put it down and give it a break, because if I keep on overplaying it, it will become a learned behaviour. So if you overdo a strength, it could drop down and become a learned behaviour. Over time, the weaknesses, sadly, are probably the most stable part of the quadrant. And what I find really refreshing is, as you change context and you move through life and different roles, the strengths profile will evolve. And so you will find things moving around. So you may find that moving from one job to another enables you to harness and make more use of some of your unrealised strengths. And you may discover, as you gain more work experience, that the strengths that are not even appearing suddenly it start to emerge. So I love it because it's dynamic. So this isn't something that this is trying to fix you and say this is who you are and this is what your strengths list is. It's a dynamic thing that will change and evolve over time, and you can consciously maybe pick on a strength from time to time and think about how you might hone or practice it to see what it's like to work on it and get better in one or two of the strengths that you see listed. You might need one or two strengths for a particular job. Be interesting to see if you also enjoy them when you get more, become more skillful in using them. Another thing I wanted to say is that, of course, we all have our blind spots. So this is a self-assessed report. So it's as good as the person completing it. And we all have our blind spots. And strengths are one of those things where you may be using strengths without even being aware of it, because they feel natural to you and normal, and surely everybody organises their lives in this way or approaches problems in this particular fashion. That's not necessarily the case. So the things that you feel comfortable doing may be demonstrating your strengths without you even realising it. So sometimes you might not notice that you have them. So what's a fun thing to do is, without sharing your profile with one or two people who know you really well, maybe a mentor or a family member or a good friend, is to give them the strengths dictionary and say, if you can only pick 7 off this list, which strengths would you use to describe me? And I want supporting evidence as well. I don't want just a list. I want to know what you've observed and what you know about me to tell me what you think. And then compare notes and see what the overlap is like, because they might have spotted things you didn't notice or weren't aware of, or there may be a good degree of correlation, which in itself is also an interesting thing to do. So that is quite a fun task, and I would recommend that you do have a look at that. And the final thing I would say about strengths is they become much more real when you anchor them with evidence. So it's all fine and dandy having a report. You might look at it, think that was nice, and then it gets stuck in a drawer for some long time and you forget you've done it. But if you go through systematically and look at your strengths and identify what they do and what they describe, look at the definition, start to put some evidence. Where have you used that particular strength in action? Where could you bring out an example if you were going to a job interview or an internship interview, and if you were asked about your strengths or to illustrate how you approached a particular problem or task, what could you draw on? Because the more real and more grounded you make the strengths that you have, the more confident you'll be in the fact that you do actually have these strengths, and the more convinced the recruiter will be that you were demonstrating these things in action. So I'm going to stop there now, and I will just quickly move on and finish with this quote, and then open it up in case anybody has any questions. I love this quote. I stumbled across it the other day. Always remember you matter, you're important, and you are loved, and you bring to this world things no one else can. So if you take nothing else away, know that you're unique, and your strengths will not be the same as anybody else's within the migrant leaders community. There may be some similarities, there may be overlaps, but these are uniquely yours. And we should be celebrating these, qualifying them as supporting evidence, and enjoying using them, in particular your realised and your unrealised strengths.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was wonderful. Thank you to both Trudy and Anne. Very, very enjoyable presentation.
Thank you.